So anyway, the man sitting here is Dr. Thomas Hornbein. And Tom Hornbein became a hero for me at age 14 when I picked up a copy of his book, The West Ridge of Mount Everest, which was edited by David Brower, who, as was mentioned, did the foreword to my first Sierra book, or my second Sierra book. And Tom, how many people, raise your hand, are familiar with Tom's story of the West Ridge? Okay, plenty of you. Well, it was great to hear Tom tell it at his home in Estes Park. For those of you who don't know the story, in 1963, Tom went to Mount Everest. He was invited on the American Everest expedition, and the goal of that expedition was to get up the South Col route. But Tom and Willie Unsold were going to do a first descent up a route, obviously, that had not been done on a side of the mountain that really had basically not been done. And they were going to go up the West Ridge, which I was on in 1983, and they were going to traverse the mountain and then go down a route that they had never been on. So, and this is at 29,000, I think 32 feet. And they did, at the time, they did the highest bivouac without oxygen, 28,000 feet, coming down the South Col route. Anyway, it was, Tom wrote the foreword to my latest book. And that was quite an honor. And he's an incredible man, recently passed away. And what a, just what an unbelievable and amazing story. Okay, there's Tom's book, Everest the West Ridge, and this is the 50th year of the climb edition. And this is a picture of Tuolumne Meadows that I took, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago. This is where I spent most of my time as a Yosemite climber. And this man's name is Don Harder. And Don was just another great Yosemite climber, but Don basically saved my life on my first climb in Tuolumne. I got to the top of a route called Truck and Drive, and I was 16 years old, and it was 5/8 climbing, and slab climbing. I was probably 20 feet, 30 feet above my last bolt, and I only had a 120-foot rope, and I was stuck. And this voice came trickling down from the ledge above me and said, "Do you need a hand down there?" I said, "Yeah." And so Don lowered an end of the rope and tied into it, and he and I have been friends for 50 years, and Don's just an amazing, still an amazing climber. This is me on pioneering a route called Heinous in Tuolumne Meadows. And I loved all the parts of slab climbing, steep slab climbing, and just really testing my mettle on Yosemite granite. I did a lot of climbing with Vern Clevenger, who's a well-known Sierra climber and photographer. We spent a decade doing a lot of really hard climbing in the Sierra. Let me try and fix this here a little bit. This happens to be maybe a little better. Alan Bard, and that name may or may not mean something to you. Alan and his brothers were, especially his brother Dale, were pioneering climbers in the 1970s and 80s. And this is Roy McClellan and Ann Tarver, and that's my orange Ford pickup. And this is the Tuolumne Meadows Grill parking lot where I spent a lot of time. That's Vern Clevenger and Jim Keating, my wife to be, Nancy Ingersoll, and yeah, this is life as what's known as a climbing bum. Here's the dean of American rock climbing at the time, Jim Bridwell, and so I knew Jim well. We climbed together. He did. He was the man. He was what we called the admiral, the bird. He ran the this ragtag group of climbers back in the 70s, and I loved the raunchiness of climbing. And another, not quite as raunchy, was I take this off. I was also a skier, and this is this ragtag group of people at the end of Highway 4 on the west side of the Sierra, and we're all just ski bums. We had our jobs, and we were just spending as much time as we could skiing at Mount Reba. There's how I made part of my living during the winters, shoveling snow. And we were all out to grab as much powder skiing as we could, and that's what we did. So another influence, I won't call this high literature, but this is Doug Robinson's group called the Armadillos. And this is Mountain Gazette, I think 27. And Doug wrote this article about the state of ski touring in the Sierra at the time. And it was the 1970s, and it was just developing. And I took that article to heart, and I said, wow, this guy skied the John Muir Trail in the winter without a map, with no stove. Little did he say that his stove blew up in a ball of flames. And anyways, so I said, you know what? I want to ski the John Muir Trail. I didn't know how to ski, but I flourished this article in front of a friend of mine, and we set out in the fall of 1978, and we put 4 caches out, and we went on a shakedown cruise to the Three Chimneys in the Sonora Pass area, so we could ski, we could camp, we could, cook outside. It's time to load up the Volvo and head down to Whitney Portal. Here's the start of the Whitney Portal on March 9th of 1979. And of course, you'll all recognize the Cirque underneath McCaddy, Mount Muir, and there's Muir. There are our tents, and it proceeded to snow 1.5 feet. And our friends who came with us said, we're leaving. And Jim Keating and I continued a little kind of Jim Keating was, his dad was Tom Keating, and he was a state senator and a federal court judge, and he wrote the bill to make Mount Tamalpais state park. So here's Jim and I on our first first and only trip over Trailcrest, breaking trail. And see the ski on the right? It's got ropes running through it. Well, there were no such thing as climbing skins at this time. So we took ropes and we wound our ski through it, and we tied it off in front of the bale, and that's how we skied up and down, headed toward the Rhombus Diamond Mesa. And here's Forester Pass. And we do not have a rope. We do not have crampons. We do not have an ice axe. So you can see the cornice at the top there. And so Jim gets up and over it. We get to the other side of Forester Pass, and it snows 3 feet. And so this is 2.5 days, and then we're headed toward our first food cache, and which is at Kearsarge Pass. And what happens at Kearsarge Pass, a 300-pound marmot has eaten through over half of our cache. And so we divvy up the food and we say we've got 9 days stretchable to 10. And this was a defining moment in my life as a climber and a mountaineer, because I said, it would be really easy to ski out over Kearsarge Pass. We could be down in Independence in half a day eating hamburgers and drinking milkshakes. And we kept going. The pink cord is an avalanche cord. And what that is 75 feet of light, like 2 mil cord. This is invented by the Swiss. And every meter there is a crimped on arrow. And the arrow pointed back to the victim, right? And the theory was that the cord floated on top of the avalanche coming down. And as Jim and I were fond of saying, no one has ever been found alive with an avalanche cord on, which was technically true. Anyway, so down Glen Pass, there's our tracks in the back. Jim inspected his pole, and it was broken. Not to worry, you can see his pole with a bunch of tape on it. We just splinted it and put it back together and continued on. Past the Palisades. And one trip down Mather Pass with really nice snow. And of course, we were in this winter wonderland that we just didn't even know existed. We broke into, let's admit our faults, we broke into the LeConte Ranger Station because the night before, we were camped in LeConte Canyon. We were 300 feet uphill from the Kings River. An avalanche came down. We could hear it. We could hear it snapping off the branches of trees. It ran 300 feet uphill and buried us. And we said, well, that's kind of enough of camping out in LeConte Canyon during a storm. Let's go down to the ranger station. And anyway, we did. All of you, most of you, will recognize Muir Hut. At this point in time, we've got a bouillon cube and a tea bag. And it was still incredibly beautiful. And there we are as young 22-year-olds or whatever, down to past Evolution Valley and down to the San Joaquin River, where we could, bask on warm granite. Our next cache was at the Diamond D Ranch, Blaney Meadows, and that was intact. We had it in a barrel inside of a building, and the hot springs there. We took obviously luxuriated in the hot springs and did our laundry, and then onward toward to the north, Jim clowning around, and now our terrain started to get more familiar. There's Ritter and Banner in the background, and we're headed toward what I considered home, Tuolumne. This is Jim out of focus because he's digging furiously down to the bottom of that dumpster because there's a 12-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. And anyway. And of course, we had to get in the hot springs there at Red's Meadow and skiing past Banner. It was a good snowpack, a lot of snow. Top of Donahue Pass, looking down into Lyle Canyon, and that's a lot of snow. And there's Cathedral Peak. We're headed for the Visitor Center. We're headed for the Visitor Center where we left a cache, and that cache had been most of the way eaten and and it was friends of ours. And they said, yeah, right. And they said, we never thought you'd get here. Anyway, so we're on top of Lambert Dome and just sunshine. It's starting to be springtime and the sun setting over Tuolumne Meadows. Gym at the top of Vernal Falls, and then down the Mist Trail, and to the sign that there it is, 211 miles from whence we came. And we were stormbound for 11 days, and the trip took us 33 days. And but this is a moment in my life that solidified, made it crystal clear of who and what I wanted to be, and that was a mountaineer. And I had taken my pictures, and I did a trip journal, so to speak. But it was, in a lot of ways, not satisfying. So the other big moment in my life was I met Nancy Fiddler in 1979. And anyway, that's a whole nother story in life. But Nancy and I are still married 43 years later. And Nancy was a phenomenal skier, two-time Olympian, 2 world championships, the only World Cup points by any skier in the United States for a decade. And her biggest achievement is she started the Ski PE program in Mammoth, the Master Skiing program in Mammoth, the after-school skiing program in Mammoth, and she still doesn't do all of them, but she still does them. And what a great partner in the mountains. And then the other great partner I had, the great partner I had, it was Vern Clevenger in climbing. And this is Vern and I at the top of a route called Heart of Stone. My name from the Rolling Stones. You'll never break this heart of stone. And yeah, we were climbing bums. The other thing that Vern and I started doing, and Peter Croft said, Claude and Vern invented class multi-day climbing by going sideways. And so this is us. This is the Minarets, which we traversed in 2.5 days, and I think it was 1980. And the rock is incredibly good, really solid, but we roped up only 3 times. Most of the time we're on rope. The other person, or one of the other people, was Galen Rowell. And that's Galen on the left, Vern on the right. And we have just done a big 1,200-foot first descent, 23 miles in the backcountry. Galen was always really hard to get a hold of and organize to do a trip with, because he was so dang busy after he did the article for National Geographic on climbing Half Dome. But look at Galen's left foot. He's wearing an EB climbing shoe. So what's happened on the wall that we were on, that we climbed, I'll go back, Galen's running shoe got pulled out of the haul pack and fell, never to be found. We spent the night out. It was October, and he has to hike 23 miles out in a climbing shoe. For those of you familiar with putting on a climbing shoe and hiking out, and Galen's smiling. So, bravo. The other part of my life was of course in Yosemite, not of course, but was in Yosemite Valley, and this is me starting up El Capitan, and of course fast and light was not something at that particular moment, and the slick granite and this happened to be the only time that I ever spent a night on El Capitan, and I'd done it 7 times, and all those times in a day, in hours actually. my friend Ron Mitchell at one of the bivouacs. I'm telling Ron, don't worry, I got it, been there, done this. And it's just, for me as a climber, just that beautiful sweep of El Capitan granite was just, it still is just so gorgeous. Heading up the head wall of the Salafé wall. And the other part of my life was that was evolving, transitioning, transforming, um, trying and failing, was photography. And I really didn't know what I was doing. There were no books, there was no internet, there was no YouTube. An Ansel Adams workshop cost $250. That was a summer's worth of food in Tuolumne. I can't do that. And so I had no idea about composing or how to manage light or how color film reacted to light, or I just kind of reacted to scenes, and I didn't know what made a strong composition. I didn't know if something would translate from what I saw to what would happen on film. I probably took this picture as, hey, I'll come back and climb those one day. Um, the light and whether it worked or didn't work. That happens to be from the summit of Mount Russell, looking at the Kaweah Peaks. And I take pictures at Pothole Dome, and they basically didn't work. You know, they just weren't really strong, and they really had nothing to say. There's some shadow and some light and a reflection, but eh. So that was another, but it made me really determined to work at it. And so it's been 1979 to the present, whatever that adds up, for years that I've been working, and most of those with a large format camera, 4x5. So I wasn't good at photographing. I was good at climbing. And one of the smarter things I did was get married to Nancy. And Dale Bard on the left, Vern, most of Camp 4, and 1982 in Leidig Meadow in Yosemite Valley. It was a really fun event. Someone said the other day, they said, "Look at that hair," and I said, "Mine or Nancy's?" Anyway, well, so as I said, part of my Sierra history, well, my climbing, not acumen, but what I really wanted to connect with were the pioneers. This is Dick Leonard, Richard Leonard, Glenn Dawson. I really like that picture of Glenn. That's at Larchmont at Dawson's bookstore. The man, Jules Eichhorn. That was, having pancakes with Jules Eichhorn was quite an honor at his house in Redwood City. As Tom Hornbein referred to him, Mr. Conservation, Dave Brower, with the Ansel Adams print in the back. Galen was not a photographic influence, but just an overall influence. Galen brought enthusiasm to everything he did, especially driving. I mean, we would be going down 395. Galen would be going 95 miles an hour in his Chevrolet Nomad, and he would have his arms slung over the back seat, and Vern and I would be sitting in the back like kids, and he'd be talking to us. And I happened to mention, I said, "Galen, how are you like navigating the road?" He said, "Oh, I can see it straight behind us." And anyway, he so, oh yeah, it was you could hear Galen coming from miles away. I also climbed with Southern California climber Bob Camps, and this is Bob in his mid 60s, and at that point in time he was climbing hard 511, and he was really good at it. I mean, severe hard climbing, and he was just so mild-mannered until I made mistakes. And what I mean by a mistake is if I didn't do a move quite right, Bob would say to me, he'd say, Claude, you can't climb that way. And he was, it had to be precise and just so. So this happened to be, I don't know if I would call it a turning point, but I went to Mount Everest in 1983 to try and repeat the West Ridge of Everest, Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold's first ascent. And at the airport, our stuff just getting loaded, and of course, Kathmandu was not quite medieval, but it definitely felt like you were taking a step back in time. And I was talking with a friend of mine, Deb Halberstadt, about this cultural appropriation of I'm out there taking pictures of people worshiping and going about their lives and how appropriate that was. Well, I didn't have that thought in 1983, and I was just really taken with how different the place was, how green the Kathmandu Valley was. There were no other Westerners in Kathmandu when I was there. And this is our gear, taking off, headed for Everest Base Camp to get picked up by however many porters. And this is the start of our trek. We are trekking in the monsoon. So it's July. And it was a wonderful time to be there. I mean, just the clouds were outrageous and it was green and there was no one there. So the guy, that's me with the headband on. The guy in the front is Todd Bibler. Has anyone here raise your hand if you've heard of the Bibler tent? There's Todd. Todd, until a couple of years ago, he and I were still climbing quite a bit together. A fantastic, fantastic mountaineer. The guy in the red shirt, Rennie Jackson, the chief climbing ranger for Teton National Park. Our porters headed through rice paddies, the rhododendron forests, and porter plastic. And we had these beautiful clouds and these deep river valleys that we're walking through. It was the monsoon, so it did rain, and a lot. But this is a very like a mountain travel style trip. The villages were just super picturesque for me. This is Jim Sano, who is the chief naturalist for Yosemite National Park. Payday for our porters. And when you're there, you start to see the higher peaks up there. Our loads got transferred to yaks, very colorful, great. The preferred method of herding the yaks was to throw rocks at them, run alongside, and then sort of the mystical part of the trek for me was getting to the monastery at Tangmoshe. And this photograph made me realize that I did not need a mountain of mistakes for a molehill of success with photography. It was one or two images that were really done well, that had a lot of intent, where the light was good, where the technical parts of it came together, that were meaningful for me. The trek continues on toward Everest Base Camp, and then in one day, you're hang on a second. I really want to get that projector up a little bit. too high. There we go. So you're kind of trundling along, and then you look up, and that peak in the distance, 11,000 feet above you, is Mount Everest. And look at the terrain immediately in front of us. Would you go climbing there? This is base camp. Everybody's heard the horror, no, I guess horror stories of, hundreds and hundreds of tents. There were 17 tents at base camp. They were all ours. There's the team. And let's see, I've got one of those little pointers here somewhere. Maybe not. I was looking for, okay, I guess I'll have to do it without it. I don't really want to. Oh, sure. Okay, so this is what's called the low law. And right here, there's a tower left by the Yugoslav climbers in the spring. They failed on the West Ridge. They were trying to do it. And that's what we have to get to in order to continue the climb. Here's the terrain, kind of like the Devil's Crags, right? Me on my first trip up, and there's what the climbing looked like. And there's the tower. So the tower had this cable on it, and my job was to get 7 tons of gear up to this point. So from 17,000 feet to 21,000 feet. And so we started by turning this cable until the cable broke. That's the Khumbu ice fall in the background there. And we put the loads on a trolley. And so when the cable broke, I built this pad, and then I hooked up a 3-to-1 pulley system, and we walked back and forth. Well, I walked back and forth for 10 days at 21,000 feet, hauling these loads up. I got in great shape. And those 3 figures are where Advanced Base Camp is going to be. Lhotse in the background, whatever it is, 28,000 something. And that peak right there is Changxi at 25,000 feet. This is the terrain that we're going to go up, avoid that, get up here to Camp 2 and 3. There's what it looks like climbing. There's what it looks like after a little bit of a windstorm. And there's Camp 3. Camp 4 is over here. Camp 5 is up here, and that's the summit of Everest. Those boxes there were Willans boxes made by Don Willans in England. And these were left by the spring attempt. Everybody was trying, lots of people were trying to do the 20th anniversary of the West Ridge. No one succeeded. It didn't get climbed for another 15 years. There's the headed towards Camp 4. Again, you can see Sandy Stewart there isn't wearing a jacket. It's pretty warm. Everest starts to look a little fearsome. And the Hornbein Couloir starts to look really fearsome. So Camp 5 is here. And remember, Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold go from here to here, back to where you can't see. They've never done the climb. They traverse the mountain and bivouac at 28,000 feet. I feel really lightweight when I figure out what Tom did. This is Todd Bibler on our attempt. Actually, I supported Todd going up the Hornbein. Here's the Hornbein. Take a look at what's at the top of the Hornbein. So you're at 27,200 feet. Would you start climbing there? the tent, home sweet home. Unfortunately, this is what Mount Everest looked like. There was a little bit of wind. This is what Camp 4 looked like, a little bit of wind. Uh, we were really desperate to try and get Todd off. We couldn't get to him. Um, he had to get himself out of there. He and Sherpa. There was a second attempt, Annie Whitehouse, with using oxygen. I did not use oxygen. With Rennie Jackson on their attempt. Here's Rennie doing 5/8 climbing at the top of the Hornbein in crampons, and the wind basically blew him back to Camp 5. Rennie, for those of you who are physicians, had got down and he had a blood pressure of 80/60. I asked Gil Roberts from the 63 Everest expedition. Gil was the doctor on that expedition. He was a close friend of mine. I said, Gil, so yeah, Rennie was at 80/60. He goes, yeah, you mean shock. And Gil was the head of emergency medicine at Alta Bates in Berkeley. Anyway, it was time for me to go home, which I did. And I went back to being a Sierra climber. This wall is Mount Kenness. And that the climb was done by Warren Harding. For those of you, I don't know, raise your hand. Who knows who Warren Harding is? Okay, good, fair amount. So Warren Harding was a Yosemite climber, but he did a few routes in the High Sierra. And he did significant routes in the High Sierra. And not many. He did Keeler Needle, he did Mount Kenness, and he did, I mean, I guess you could count the south face of Half Dome, but probably not. Anyway, he was really funny. Warren, I met Warren. I got picked up hitchhiking by Warren, and that's another tale, and I'll keep that close to my chest. Anyway, beautiful, perfect granite, hard climbing, 5'11". But it had just become my element. It was just where I really felt at home. And this is a ski trip Nancy and I did, 1980, I believe. This is Mount Chamberlain, south of Mount Whitney. There are no climbs on the wall, none, on that beautiful chunk of granite. I did the first descent with Bob Harrington up this kind of central crack system. The other part that I don't know, I just lucked out being born when I was, because this is Jim Keating and I traversing the Erickson Crags. This is Crag 1W. In the guidebook, in Steve Roper's guidebook, it says about which nothing is known. And Jim and I did it. There was nothing up there, no cairn, no register. Oh, we just got to do this where no one else did. When we did that, the traverse of the Erickson Crags, we signed into all the original registers. I'll go back. I have that slide up because Vern Clevenger and I did this is Cleaver Peak, and then we traversed the Sawtooth Ridge, and this is the part where, you know, Peter said, yeah, this guy's invented multi-day climbing by going sideways. The other part of being a climber was also being a skier. You can see, look, the wonderful equipment we had, you know, that we kind of lived through, frame packs, Sierra Design tents, collapsing, you know, it was, but we did learn how to ski on really light equipment because that was the only equipment that was out there. But we did learn how to get North Face VE24s, MSR stoves, equipment improved, and our comfort in the back. Yes, those are lawn chairs. Yes, that is Milestone Peak. So we are out for 10 days ski touring in the spring, And, you might as well be comfortable. And this is Nancy. We brought our skiing skills with us. Time to move on as the snow started getting too slushy, and our hair started looking not that great. So 1985, Nancy and I are on a 30-day trip through the south part of the Great Western Divide along the front side. What's the front side of the Kauai's? The east face of the Kauai's. And there's been a thunderstorm and we're drying out. And this trip was another milestone for me. I was using at that time, this is not in the Sierra, but I'm using a large format camera, which I used exclusively. I didn't own another camera. That was it. I used that for 30 years. And so when I got a hold of a point and shoot, I had anyways, it eventually worked out. But I took a picture of Precipice Lake, which is famous for Ansel Adams. Didn't call it Precipice, and it did have the name. He called it Ice and Cliffs, 1932, I think. And so I took this picture, and I took it with absolute conviction and intent. I knew what I was doing. And then it took me 3 years to take another one that meant something. So everyone who says and thinks, that it just happens every night in the Sierra, it doesn't. This is with someone asked me about, this is below Observation Peak, which is on the list. I was not there to climb Observation Peak. I was there to climb Mount Shakespeare. And this is an evening shot. I had to change the film in my sleeping bag because it's 4x5 film. It doesn't come in a canister. It's sheet film. And I'm standing, I don't know, on a bunch of slabs that was a little bit precarious. And I was lucky. So this is Francis Lake. Lake 11006. I'm looking back towards the evolution group of peaks. And what's interesting here is Nancy and I did this big long traverse out to the end of the glacier divide. And we saw two names in kind of an obscure peak. Guess who they were? Gordon MacLeod and Barbara Lilly. And we were excited, we said, great. They were, but guess what? There was no other names in it. Anyway, so let's see, here's the Devil's Crags. And in 1992, I traversed the Devil's Crags and did a first ascent on the east face of Crag 2. And I signed into all the original registers. I don't know if they're still there. But I did a trip with Nancy, and I came back 30 days later with 10 days of food to sit in this one spot to take this picture. I knew it when I saw it. And then came down to Grouse Meadows, and the Sierra is a place of wonderful fall color. Mount Whitney from the slopes of Mount Barnard. So now I'm again in 1992. Tulania Lake, same trip. I took a picture 12 years ago. This is the 6th time I've gone up to Russell Carillon Col. So from 8,600 feet to 12,600 feet, 6 different times to take this picture over the course of 10 years. Tuolumne Meadows, this picture took me 8 trips over the course of 1 summer in order to get this photograph. This I happened to walk into, Lost Lakes, Rittering Banner. I left my tripod and just left it set up. put the camera back. I don't just do big landscapes. This is a dogwood in the fall in Yosemite Valley. This took me 2 years to realize, because see those leaves? With a 4x5 camera and the aperture, how big the lens is open, that you have to stop down to, you have to have 1 second exposure where nothing moves. So I lucked out. Nothing moved for 1 second, but only for one picture. Mount Lyell, which Ansel Adams, I think, called this beautiful gliding ship. Anyway, this is off of, for those of you, the upper Rock Creek drainage. I'm on Mitre Peak and looking down and into the sort of the southern end of the Sierra. Climbing was still a part of my life, and I never took climbing pictures, believe it or not. So this is myself, oops, and my friend Danny Whitmore, who is the avalanche forecaster for Inyo National Forest, a very successful contractor in Mammoth Lakes. And this is us going fast and light. Both of us going fast and light. And we're on our way to traverse the Kuyas. And away we went. Black Kuya register was still intact. All of the registers were still intact. We were, except for second Kuya, we were pretty much doing one of the early ascents on a lot of the peaks. When you're doing something like this, you have to move, pretty quickly over easier terrain, and it gets exposed. So what's interesting here, I'm rappelling down Charles Michael, his route, which was done in 1912 alone. And I rappelled 6 times. So he did it alone in 1912 with no rope, and it was 5, 6, 5, 7 climbing. That's what it looked like. Congratulations, Danny. Congratulations, Claude. So, Nancy and I got married. Nancy was finished World Cup skiing. What do? Well, we had a child and give them food and water, and look what happens. So this is, Laurel was out when she was 16 months old on a 10-day trip, and, and now she's just this avid mountaineer, skier, not a mountaineer, and she's going to graduate school in psychotherapy, actually here in Pasadena. Yep. What happens? Dad, here we go. Mom, let's have lunch. Trail? What trail, Laurel? You're kidding me. This is northern Yosemite, which I just found. This is Paiute Creek, an absolute granite wilderness. Beautiful cascades, and there's no one out there in this grand headwaters of the Tuolumne River. By the way, I really like that image. So these are the Finger Peaks in northern Yosemite. I traversed those, and it was 5/8 climbing. I didn't have a rope, and the only other name in those peaks was Jules Eichhorn. Peeler Lake. This took me 12 years to take a picture at Peeler Lake. Ottaway Lake in the Merced drainage. So we're kind of doing this is the Yosemite, this is a Red Devil Lake and the Yosemite backcountry. Waterwheel Falls, which we always try and take a pilgrimage to. I do take details, and I don't call them abstracts. I just call them details. Mono Pass Trail from the east side, which I think is one of the most beautiful hikes around. Tower Peak in an unnamed lake. And the Cathedral Peak 2 years ago when there was the road was closed to Glacier Point, and we basically ended up being the only people in the Merced drainage. It was kind of unbelievable. This lake below Red Peak, Red and Gray Peak. I saw nose. You know how when you walk around a Sierra Lake and you always see, like, oh, there's the campfire ring, or there's the sort of trail that I hate seeing. This lake had none of that going on, and it was a drought year. I mean, that's the Merced River. Chalfont Lakes. That's the backside of Mount Tom. And this was, I'm going to get to that story about Barbara and Gordon, because from that dome that I said where I saw their names, I looked across and I said, there's going to be a picture from over there. And I got there, and there was. I call this a confluence of divides: the LeConte divide, the evolution, the White divide. So this is all the headwaters of the San Joaquin River coming together. Laurel's lucky. That's her uncle Bruce and her cousin Amelia and mom Nancy. So backpacking becomes an affair. So I forget what in November of whatever year it was, I went to rescue the register on Mount Woodworth because there had been a post about the oldest signature and entry in a Sierra register still there. And I said, uh-oh. So I took off. And it was getting colder. There's Mount Langille, and so Peter Croft and I did this ridge line. So it was, and there's the Devil's Crags, and here's Peter mugging for the camera, climbing as only Peter can do, and back to the crags with more snow. The Palisades. It was really actually beautiful. It was actually kind of a pain too, hiking through the snow. There, oh, and I'll back up one. There it is, Bolton Brown, Palo Alto, 1995, August 1st. 1895, thank you. 1995, yeah, that would have been amazing. And let's see, where's Mount Woodworth, Sierra Club, yada, yada, yada. There it is, John Muir President. And pictures of the signatures until Mr. Clyde. And here's where they went, along with the canister. So the other part of my life in more recent times, how can I say recent times? 2004, I started going to the Brooks Range in Alaska. So it's been 20 years this coming summer. And all your trips into the Brooks Range start with a bush flight. And I went backpacking this last year, but I've also traveled by boat, down these big river drainages. This happens to be the Congacut river drainage. And there's our tent. And what happens to the Brooks Range in late August? The tundra goes to color everywhere. The light is incredibly beautiful. Little pack raft there. Someone mentioned, I wish there were pack rafts, back then. SP Parker is using a pack raft. Sharky and there's SP and his pack raft. And it is Alaska, so you do get to do a lot of this. You got to auger into the willows because the wind does start blowing. Look at that tundra. It's everywhere. Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. It's incredible. Sharky as God. And for mountaineers, so this ridge line extends for 20 miles. And there's a class 3 10-day trip if you were so inclined. The light, it affects me. I really, the tundra is incredibly colorful. Life can be kind of easy, I definitely am a fire wood queer. I love them. It makes life kind of bearable in the Arctic. Now watch this. It just moved. Dang, naughty wolf. Right here, there's going to be a wolf shows up, and I've been listening to it howl. So I'll play this again. It's a quick. There he is, and then there and walks away, and now he's walking away, and now he's gonna show up one more time. I'm whistling for him. There he is. That was really neat. The morning pack up and get the boats on the river, and even though it's a nice sunny day, you can see how we're dressed. It's cold. One day this is one day we're headed up this little ridge line, and this is the Arctic Ocean. And the color continues. And SP went fishing. Thank you, SP. I took a couple pictures. Sunset that went on, this rainbow went on for minutes. Minutes. This is a different trip with Andy Selters, who wrote The History of North American Climbing, and SP Parker. Mountains, ranges, big rivers. Yeah, it's just this big, beautiful place. And people ask me, well, that isn't parsley. Um, do you still go climbing? Well, yeah, I get, I have to re-up my climbing badge every so often. And so that was Dave Nettle and Ruben Shelton. And this is a trip that we took over to Boost Pass and into Lakes Basin. And that, folks, is a shorty cabin. I don't know, how many people have seen a shorty cabin? A couple people? Okay. Where did you see it? In Vedette? In Vedette? Okay, this is in Lakes Basin. And I've looked for the one at Roaring River. I didn't find that one, but I bumped into this one and went, what the heck? And I knew, immediately I knew what it was. Well, I don't know. Somewhere in the Wayback Machine, I decided that would be a climb, and so Dave and Ruben and I took off. And here's Ruben going, "Here you go, Mr. Grandfatherly older guy. You get the sharp end of the rope." I said, "Well, okay. I still know how to do this. I still know how to do offwits with the pack on and get us to the summit and get us to another regional register." So Nancy, Nancy, as I said, she's a great skier. Hates climbing. Uh, doesn't hate it, but she doesn't really. But she can ski. And here she is on racing skis uh, at Horseshoe Lake. What is that? 8,600 feet. And yeah, I'll let this go for a little bit because she just. Do. Oh, I'll back up. That's Nancy at Lahti, Finland, coming in 15th place, the only, as I said, World Cup points in a decade for American, male or female. Back when it was, you had to come in 15th, not 30th place to score World Cup points. Nancy, with her friend Sue Long, wrote this book, Trail to Gold, because all the women Olympians from the first 1976 Olympics to now are still here with us. And of course, when was it that Jessie Diggins and Keegan Randall won a gold medal in a relay together, and now they're having great success. And so they put this book together, and it's sold out. And Nancy and our daughter Laurel, Clouds Rest, still can't get enough of Yosemite and our home, right? All of us, obviously. We're in the Sierra Peak section, Claude. And this was last winter. And out behind the house for another run. And that's the end of the slideshow. Thank you. So let's see. Anybody have any? Let's see. I'll try to stand up. Anybody have any questions? Oh, okay. Oh, you've been drinking again.
No, no. Wasn't me. Wasn't me.
Questions? Answers? Yes.
When you were on Everest, how far did you get before you returned back?
I went to 27,200 feet. So it's at the equivalent of the fifth highest peak in. Yes.
When's the Brooks Rains book coming out?
Well, I started working on it. And I'm working on actually right now the photos and herding the writers, but I'm working on the photos with Michael Wilder. Michael Wilder, who I did the Sierra book with, he printed Ansel Adams' color. And so we took 4 months to get work prints and go through everything and then submit those to the printer in Seattle. And then it took another 4 months of proofs going back and forth before. So it was a 2-year project. Yeah. Yes.
Excuse me, photo question. What's your favorite lens to use these days, and what current brand are you using?
Well, when I used a 4x5, I had 3 different cameras, and I used a 150 lens, and that was the only lens I used. So and it was a Fujinon a Rodenstock, CNR, and very, very sharp lens. And now I use a Fuji medium format digital camera, and I have the lens I use the most is a 24 to 70 millimeter Fuji lens. And it's not, it takes me a lot of work to pick one lens. I do a lot of testing and to make sure that the lens works at not all the focal lengths, it never does. And so I would say 40 millimeters is my favorite focal length, which also happened to be Ansel Adams' favorite focal length. Okay? Yes.
Have you ever worked with sled dogs at all with your time in Alaska?
No, I've never been there during that time. So, actually, I'm a little bit afraid of that because it would be April. I did climb Denali in 1984, and that was a little bit like Mount Everest. Mount Everest was very. I realized that. Well, it's cold. And also it kind of bigger like Himalayan scale peaks didn't really I wasn't really that interested in it. I mean I could have seen if maybe I had more experience on climbing the Alps or something like that where I would have wanted to do that, but and I also realized when I was at 27,200 feet, and I did it twice in a day because someone dropped their load and they picked up their load and they turned around and went back up, and I came down in the dark, and I fell off the north face, and I stopped, luckily, and I realized how close you are, the margin of error. You're really close to dying. Yes,
Living at Mount Everest,
1983 in the Wansu.
with the suspension bridges, on back and forth across the,
Yes, yes.
pretty much like they are now, or you know,
I don't know. I haven't been back.
they have some new ones. But there were some old ones.
Well, yeah, they used to be. They transported all that stuff from Kathmandu and they just walked it.
Yeah.
And now helicopters.
Fun.
Yes.
Did you ever meet Bradford Washburn?
Brad Washburn, yes. I went, one trip I was in Boston, and I went to Panopticon because I moved the gallery over there, and I sat down for the day with Brad Washburn and went through his portfolio. Which was kind of phenomenal.
Was he primarily the Brooks Range too, or?
No, he is mostly the Alaska Range. As a matter of fact, I don't think he has. I've never seen a Bradford Washburn photograph from the Brooks Range. Actually, John Muir ended up seeing the Brooks Range because I wondered, and there was a rescue mission. I forget the details of it. I think it was Hampton Sides book called The Kingdom of Ice. But he doesn't mention it, and I forget where I found out the detail, but John Muir on that rescue mission, I think it was to go and find DeLong. So anyways, the DeLong was this captain of the ship trying to find the Northwest Passage. They get stranded. Their ship blows apart. They get stranded on an iceberg. They drift 1,500 miles to Siberia, where some native Siberians saved them. And then there was a rescue mission to go and try and find them. And Muir was on the rescue mission. And so that's when he saw that, because they went by St. Lawrence Island. And there's a lot of enemies. This is kind of amazing. Anyway, all right. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Claude. That was amazing. Unbelievable. So with that, I guess it's closed the 2024 banquet. So thanks for everybody for coming. Great showing. It was a great presentation. Unbelievable. Yeah. Beyond expectations.